Hi, this is the second lecture of two lectures for topic one. And this lecture is going to focus on terms we're going to be using throughout the course of this semester. So, what are we going to be covering in this lecture? Well, it's pretty short and it's going to be a quick primer on terms that we will be referencing this semester. So, we'll be taking a look and defining what we mean by sex, gender identity, gender roles, and sexual orientation. And then there will be a little opportunity in the lecture for you to apply the concepts that we have discussed. Okay, so when we talk about gender, what are we talking about? Well, one way we think about gender is in terms of your gender identity. What does that mean? Well, gender identity is your psychological or personal sense of oneself. And so it's your sense that you have in your brain that you are a man or that you are a woman or that you are gender queer outside of a binary, that you don't feel like you fit into either gender identity, or transgender. And so there are many different, etc. And so there are, Facebook is a good example. You can select your gender identity. And right now, I think it's 71, maybe it's unlimited, but gender identity is basically your personal sense of what your gender is. Two terms that you might come across, or that you might have heard, is the term of cisgender and the term of transgender. And so, what does that mean? Well, cis is Latin for on this side. And so, what cisgender means is that when your biological sex is on the same side as your gender identity. So, in other words, if you have, if you're XX, you have a vagina and other parts, breasts, a clitoris, then, and you feel like you're a woman, then you would be cisgender. On the flip side of that, if there is if you, trans is on not the same side of, but sort of on the other side. So think about like transatlantic flight. On the one side of the Atlantic Ocean is the United States. On the other side is Europe. And so transgender is when your biological sex is on the other side of your gender identity. And so your XX in terms of, and that you have anatomic characteristics like a vagina, but you don't feel like a woman. That you feel in your psychological personal sense is that of being a man, or sort of gender fluid, right? Where the parts don't match up with the identity. Okay. And so that when we refer to gender identity, that's what we're talking about. Another type of gender that we talk about is the idea of gender roles. And gender roles are not necessarily what your psychological or personal identity, sense of identity is as it relates to your gender, but rather it is the social expectations for how people who are perceived as men and people who are perceived as women should behave. And oftentimes the gender role revolves around a concept of what it means to be masculine and what it means to be feminine. And so masculinity and femininity are separate from gender identity. You could feel like you're a woman, but that what it means to be a woman doesn't necessarily correspond with society's understandings of what femininity is. And so gender role is sort of like when gender identity, in particular man or woman, gets like sort of melded into or pushed into a social expectation for how those gender identities should behave. And so clear understanding of what it means to be masculine, you never cry, you don't talk a lot, yeah, muscles, whatever, however we think about masculinity in sort of a stereotypical sense. Femininity, dainty, delicate, you keep quiet, you always look nice, curl your hair or whatever. I'm not judging people who curl their hair or anything. But I mean, you have these sort of social expectations for how men and women should behave. And the final term that we're going to take a look at is the idea of, or the concept of sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is about who you're attracted to. And so sexual orientation is one's physical or emotional attraction to another person. And so sexual orientation, oftentimes is sort of thought about in terms of like being attracted to the same sex, the same gender, or the opposite gender. These categories are a little clunky because if you're gender fluid and you're just attracted to this other person, you may not necessarily fall into, one of these categories that we're going to identify. But, you will come across category of somebody who gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual. Gay is usually a man who is somebody who identifies as a man who is attracted to other men. Lesbian is somebody who identifies as a woman and is sexually attracted to other women. Straight refers to when people are of one gender are attracted to the person of another gender, men being attracted to women, women being attracted to men. Bisexual, and that, sort of pansexual, right? Asexual, you kind of fall in the category of that gender fluidity. A person could identify as being a woman, but is attracted to both men and women. A person who is identify as a man could be, attracted to a multitude of genders. But, just for simplicity's sake, sexual orientation, it's really one's physical and emotional attraction to other humans. Okay, so here is your opportunity to apply some of these concepts that we were just talking about. So ask yourself I'm going to show you a little like sentence, and then ask yourself, well, do you think this is an issue dealing primarily with sex, gender identity, gender roles, or sexual orientation? The first one is, I need to go to my primary care physician to get a pap smear or get a prostate exam. Okay, so think about it. Give yourself a moment there. Is that about an issue of biological sex, gender identity, gender roles, sexual orientation? Your answer? If you said sex, biological sex, you are correct. So you could identify as, your gender identity could be a woman, but you could very well still, have anatomical parts like a prostate that would need to be examined and checked by a physician, right? You could identify as a man, but you could very well still have a cervix that needs some caring or some medical tests. What about this one? When I see a person, it really makes my heart go pitter pat. I want to kiss them. Sex, gender identity, gender roles, sexual orientation. If you guessed check sexual orientation, you're correct, because it is that emotional and sexual attraction that you have to another person. And how about these? I really want to take family leave to bond with my newborn, but I'm worried about how that's going to be perceived at work. That would be gender role, because there's a social expectation of how a man or a woman, in this case, should behave. And so if you're a man and you really want to take family leave because you really want to bond with your child, social, I think things have changed, but there could still be pressure of like, well, it's not what men do. Men work. That's what it means to be masculine. Leave that to the ladies, right? But again, kind of an example of gender roles. And then finally, I really don't feel like a man or a woman. That would be gender identity. Again, the psychological or personal sense of what your gender is. And we'll conclude here by taking a look at something you've probably seen, the genderbread person. It's just, it's not a gingerbread person, it's a genderbread person. And so it looks like a gingerbread person, but it's about gender. And so you see that gender identity is pointing to the brain because it's a sense of how we feel, or our psychology of our gender identity. Sexual attraction or orientation is the heart, because your heart goes pitter pat when you see somebody. Biological sex is your anatomical parts that are dictated primarily by chromosomes and hormones. And then on this it says gender expression, and that's not something we talked about. Gender expression is sort of how you manifest your gender identity. And so that, given your gender identity, this is how you want to express that gender identity. We talked about gender roles being the sort of the way that society lays those expectations on you, but gender expression is how you express yourself to society in terms of how you define your gender identity. Okay, that's it. Short, sweet, to the point, but these are important concepts that we will be talking about throughout the course of the semester. Thanks for listening.